Welcome, everybody, to Connecting the Universe. I'm author and researcher Mike Ricksecker, back at you with another interactive class of the Secret Library of the Connected Universe. Well, almost didn't do this one this evening because I had a very late night last night, actually on Coast to Coast, not the election stuff, although I may have may have been watching that, waiting to get on to George's show at 3 in the morning on the East Coast. So really tired today. Had another podcast earlier. It's like, man, am I going to be able to do this today? But here we are talking about about proving legends, surprising discoveries that rewrite history. So if you caught my article the other day on Monday on my blog, we got into a number of different locations, and so we're going to cover some of that stuff this evening. These different locations that were thought to just be a legend, just thought to be a myth, and oh, lo and behold, guess what? We found it years and years later. So I do want to throw out there, those that are listening to the podcast version of this later, please join us every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, connecteduniverseportal.com. There is a public live stream version of it on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@mricksecker. But if you want that exclusive after show, plus so much more, like the monthly Q&A videos coming out tomorrow, sneak peek behind the scenes videos, Mike Morning Mugs video, insider travel vlogs, which is really like you going on the adventure with us, just sitting from your own home, like ancient Egypt, the American Southwest, Ireland, and so much more that's out there. connecteduniverseportal.com. Yeah, and then of course we have, speaking of, just a year from now, I mean, just more than a year, sorry, not mathing that out right, just more than a year from now, we will be on that Stargates of Ancient Egypt Tour 2025. So I really encourage people to join us for that. Let me throw the banner up here for you really quick. Going to be another amazing one. And oh, by the way, the gym is now open. So the Grand Egyptian Museum is now open. We will be going to that. And we are hitting some places that we have not hit before on this tour. One that I have been to before, Temple of Esna, which does have those ties back to Atlantis, and they've fully restored it now. Absolutely beautiful colors. We just saw them starting on that a few years ago. That's now available, or now fully restored. Then the Lahoun Pyramid, the Egyptian Labyrinth, the Fayum Oasis, all that we have on our second day. And of course, we've got 2-hour special access to the Great Pyramid of Giza, just ourselves. Of course, all the Stargate temples, along with the 4-day Niles cruise. So definitely check that out. All right. So, got a number of people in the house this evening. Let's check in, give a few shout outs before we get started. Sarah Yusuf is in the house. Great to see you, Sarah. Emil is here. Always wonderful to see you too. Tom McNicholas, always great to see you, buddy. Haley Stack is here with us tonight. Great to see you down there, Haley. Charlotte, wonderful to see you as well. FB, thank you for joining us tonight from Southern California. Michelle Brandenburg is back with us again this evening. Great to see you, Michelle. Scarlett as well. Yeah, Sarah, I need to get my coffee IV, definitely. Brandy Starleaper is back with us. Great to see you down there. And Joe Rivera, always. And Michelle saying, I'm loving your book, Portals to the Stars. Bought two. Well, thank you. Going to do a giveaway. I really, really appreciate that. So yeah, new book here, Portals to the Stars, Inside Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt, just came out last week. We highlighted that in last week's show. So yeah, if you haven't gotten it yet, be sure to check that out. So you can get that through my website, MikeRicksecker.com, which just kind of links you to Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, all those wonderful places. The second in the Connecting the Universe series, Travels Through Time, is the first. All right, let's go ahead and get into this. So like I said, this stems from my article that I published on Monday. So I've linked that article down there in the chat. And it's just a couple of different things that came up here. Part of it was inspired by an interview I had with Dave Schrader on his Paranormal 360 on Sunday. And then, yeah, this article here out of Norway. And so, what we're looking at here, and I started each paragraph or each little story as for centuries, because, yeah, it always seems like for centuries, for hundreds of years, sometimes thousands of years. It's like, no, 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 it's not real. It's not real. It's not real. So, with this one in Norway, it's the legend of the Well Man. And this was passed off as a piece of folklore regarding, I'm going to butcher the name, King Sverre Sigurdsson's. That's kind of really a shame. I mean, I do speak a little German. I know this is Norwegian, but it's yeah, the accent is similar, right? Norwegians are probably going to hate me on that one, but in any case, you'd think I'd be able to pronounce it. So King Sverre, basically, during his reign in the 12th century, in 1197, he attacked Sverreborg Castle. It was a really bloody raid. He burned down the stronghold, and in the midst of this battle, which is basically up here on the hill, you kind of see the castle ruins and stuff like that. In the midst of all this, one of the things that he's decided to do to thwart his adversaries was poison the water supply. This is all part of the legend. And to poison the water supply, he basically took a dead body of one of his enemies and threw it down into this well. And of course, you got a dead, rotting body in the middle of your water. And yeah, it's not drinkable. So of course he won and all of that. So for centuries, this story was told, but it was always considered just a legend, just a tale, just a fable. And sure enough, just recently here, there was an excavation at the site, which did reveal the remains of a male body within the well that is about 900 years old, putting it right in the middle of the time frame of this story about the Well Man. So, so for all of these years, like 900 years, people insisted, well, except for the people at the time that were there, right? They insisted that it just wasn't real. It wasn't true. It was just a story. Yeah, and so it takes a couple generations for that to happen, right? But it doesn't really take long. It really just takes about 3 generations for stuff to kind of cycle out and just become kind of stories and that sort of thing. So, like I could tell some tales of my grandparents, and some of those might sound like tall tales to some of my kids, or whenever I have them, some of my grandchildren, and they'd be like, yeah, right, Dad, whatever, that sort of thing, or right, Grandpa, whenever that day happens. And they might end up retelling the story, to maybe their own kids or maybe their own grandkids. And, they may throw it out there. It's like, yeah, there was this crazy story, or there was this tall tale that your dad or your grandpa told, and these things happen. And it ends up getting passed on down as some sort of family legend or tale, but it may have really happened. So, yeah, it doesn't take long for that to just suddenly end up becoming, it's that generation gap. It's usually about 3s. And there's Jen. Jen is with us. Great to see you, my love. Karen is with us as well. All right. So yeah, so that's the one that kind of like sparked this whole thing. But like I said, I was on Paranormal 360 with Dave Schrader there on Sunday. So he's got the 360 and he's got the 60. So the 60 is his podcast, and the 360 is the radio show that he does on Sunday nights out of Minnesota, out of Minneapolis, WCCO, I think it is. And so, yeah, so we were chatting on there and we started talking about, and we've seen it here recently on the new season of Ancient Apocalypse with Graham Hancock, season two, where uh, in the jungle, or in the Amazon jungle, the unfortunate deforestation of that. Um, they've been obliterating the land for cattle ranching. They're like, yeah, forget the trees. We're going to plow it down, and we're going to raise cattle. And so, as they've done this, they have uncovered some really, really interesting structures that the ancient tribes had to have left. These, I mean, you have a blatant circle here. There's the square with some other designs in it. You have, let's see, you'll grab this one's here. Some other squares connected by roads, and yeah, there's like a fantastic road system that connects so many of these, and it's huge. It's massive. It just spreads for miles and miles and miles of all of these human-made structures. And so they've done some LiDAR in the area. Some of that, I should have grabbed the acronym because I'm gonna butcher it, right? So, what is it? Light detection, whatever it is. And as they've done this throughout these areas, they have discovered all sorts of hidden structures under the jungle. Really, really fascinating what they've been able to uncover with this sort of technology. And here's one here where you can see the structure and then it disappears out into the forest and you can actually see the cattle ranch down at the bottom there. All those little white dots are the cattle, and you can kind of see the fence. Again, pretty much a shame, but you can see the area that they cleared and it continues on into the forest. So what's important about this, though, is that back in 1541, you had Francisco Orellana. So he was a conquistador. He was an early Spanish explorer, and basically, he was ordered to explore the Coco River and return after finding the river's end. And then when they go off, and they're on their way to do this, part of the exploration. When they arrived at the confluence with what is now the Napo River, they were unable to return against the current. It was just too strong. So they had to keep going, and they continued downstream down the Amazon. So here's their path. They just kept sailing on and on and on, and essentially found the Amazon. It was quite the expedition. And along this path, and the reason why they ended up naming it the Amazon, just kind of like an aside, so it got named during this expedition. So in the middle, you can kind of see it there. The right hand side, second dot, battle with Amazons. So there was a skirmish that they had with the tribe of Tapuyas, and the women of the tribe fought alongside the men, which is their custom. And Oriana described the river as the river of Amazons, referring to the mythical Amazons because of these female fighters that were there alongside of him. So, doesn't sound like such a big deal so far, right? Okay, had to travel down the Amazon because he couldn't go back upriver and all of that. Well, here's the thing, is that on this trip, he had basically a scribe with him, a friar, Gaspar de Carvajal. And Carvajal chronicled the expedition's journeys. And he had all of these fantastic descriptions of dense populations of peoples, extensive road systems, massive construction projects. And just to give you a quote, one part of the river he described, there was one town that stretched without any space from house to house, which was a marvelous thing to behold. So, of course, when they finally get back with their people, they send all of these stories, back to Spain. And so, the ideas that promulgate through their minds are, oh my gosh, there's all these massive civilizations there. They've got to have a lot of gold. That was always their thing. We want the gold. We want the gold. We want the gold. So if we have all these civilizations there in the New World, we're going to go over there and we're going to conquer them and we're going to get the gold. Problem was when they came back to do that, they could hardly find anyone. They couldn't find these large cities. They couldn't find these massive amounts of people. And so for centuries, like I said, I kept using that term, for centuries, it was believed that Carvajal had essentially embellished his stories, that he created this fictionalized version of their adventures down the Amazon River. So it was just, considered myth, folklore, all of that. Became a legend. But now, with this technology, again, we are seeing with the LiDAR, we're seeing all of these building structures. And when they have actually cleared out the jungle, they are, yes, in fact, finding these footprints of where these structures had been. And so you're talking a population of millions and millions and millions of people, large civilizations that had been there. So where did they go? What happened to them? Well, unfortunately, coming from some other land, they introduced diseases that they had no immunities for. And so in the time between they left South America and the Amazon area, left and came back, disease had just decimated the entire population. And jungle grows up quick. And that, trees grew up, vegetation grew up, and just swallowed those structures that had been there. And so as they, were traversing through, like, I don't see any structures. I don't see any cities. I don't see massive amounts of people. So people had died off, and the jungle obscured any remnants of buildings that may have been there. And if these are a lot of wooden structures on top of the foundations, then that pretty much would have disintegrated. The jungle kind of eats away those structures fairly quickly. So I saw some comments down here in the chat. Let me take a look. All right, so what do we have going on? Scarlett, I remember my kids flipping out when I told them we used to pop popcorn on the stove. I had to prove it. Yeah, Jen still does sometimes, but yeah, that's not something we do anymore, right? It's all in the microwave, and so it is things like that will get passed down over time as almost being like a legend, right? So fortunately today we do have because of our technology, we can video it. Like here's something going on, but back in the day, a little bit harder. And thank you. Light detection and ranging, or laser imaging detection and ranging. Thank you. Yeah, I had it in the article, but I didn't put it here in my show notes. Yeah. So, all right. So yeah, and if you haven't seen Ancient Apocalypse yet, this second season is the Americas. I haven't watched it all yet. New book came out, so I've been a little bit busy. But yeah, that episode was pretty interesting as they were flying over these areas. And unfortunately, you have like when you see something like, and those that are listening to the podcast version of this later, you can come on out here and see the slideshow, and I do have some video clips later too. But yeah, there are ones that are like this, but there's like a highway or a road or something like that going through, or it's on a person's, whatever the person did with their property just kind of ruined the structure, which is really unfortunate. So it's like not only are they ruining the jungle, but they're also ruining these ancient structures too. But yeah, it went on and on and on. And they did the LiDAR imaging, and here's all these insane structures. It was pretty fascinating. So Tom, your uncle's a popcorn master in your family. Awesome. And Charlotte has joined us. Great to see you, Charlotte. All right. So, all right. That's the Amazon. And actually, there was one that they just came out with. I actually did not grab the photo of it. It was Campeche, Mexico, and they found 6,000 structures of some ancient Mayan city. That was 6,000. I mean, that's a pretty massive city that they were able to find there. So yeah, they should just scan it all and go out there and find it all, right? That there's so much out there that's just been lost to time like that. So it seems it's like a recurring thing. Here's these legends of these great cities along the Amazon. It's just a story, and there it is. It's true. Or with the well man, no, it's just a story. It's just a legend. Turns out to be true. And we've seen this throughout a lot of our even deeper, older history as well. So, like with the city of Troy. Now, this stems from the Iliad by Homer, and for centuries, again using that term, for centuries, it was believed that the city of Troy never existed, that it was just part of a myth written 3,000 years ago. However, and here's some of the photos of it that we have today. So it was and these guys, here's the thing, is these guys weren't professionals. It was a couple of what you call amateur archaeologists. Make sure I get the names right. Heinrich Schliemann and Frank Calvert. And basically, they both had the idea of, okay, reading the Iliad. Okay, everybody's been saying that the Iliad is just a story by Homer, and the city of Troy is just part of the city, or just part of the myth written by Homer. But these guys had the idea, and Calvert was kind of already out there poking around. But Schliemann, he reads the Iliad, and he's like, but what if it's true? What if this city really existed? Maybe some of these other things that happened in the tale are, a little fantastic and didn't really happen. But, did he base this story in a real city that actually existed? So he went down there and started poking around too. And this was in Turkey. And so where they ended up was at a place that Calvert had believed something might be there, but he didn't really have the resources to dig around. And Schliemann agreed that it was like, yeah, that's probably a pretty good spot. And the name of the place was called Trode. It's kind of, it's kind of similar. Troy, Trode. You'd wonder why people for a couple thousand years, if they were actually looking for the city, or even within a couple hundred years of these guys, could have put that together, maybe. Not that far off. So they start digging, and sure enough, there it was. They uncovered the city of Troy. It actually did exist. It's really there, and you can go visit those ruins today. But again, it's like this stubbornness that our academics seem to have. Again, these guys were amateurs. They read some stories. They did enough of their own research that they were able to deduce this might really be where it is, and they went and dug it up themselves when traditional academia is essentially laughing at them and telling them you guys are full of it. It's nonsense, but it was really there, and it's something. It seems like I've been saying this in a lot of podcasts and interviews here recently with the new book. Um, that so the science and the church have always kind of been at odds. They've always butted heads, right? But science today is really doing what the church used to do. So the church, okay, if you heard voices, if you bilocated, if you levitated, all this sort of stuff, and amongst many other things, as long as you are like clergy and within the church, then this stuff was for God. Like you were hearing God's voice, or maybe an angel's voice, or having visions of the Virgin Mary. If you're bilocating, maybe you're proselytizing to whomever you're visiting while you're bilocating. All these sorts of things. Um, Talked about in the past, Sister Mary Jesus in Spain when she bilocated to proselytize to indigenous tribes in the American Southwest. So she's in Spain, they're in the American Southwest. She's bilocating, proselytizing to them, and the people that were there at her monastery when she was basically in like a trance-like state, and they said that she became light as a feather. She was like levitating. As long as it was for the church, and for as long as part of the church is for God, we're good. But if she had been outside the church, some poor woman in a little town there or whatever, and was doing this sort of stuff, yeah, she would have been a witch. She would have been deemed a witch. It was witchcraft. She was burned at the stake or hung or whatever. Done. The same thing. We're seeing the same thing with science today, right? Like we're talking Graham Hancock a moment ago there. So he is an investigative journalist, right? That's how he started his career. He was going overseas, not to really do the work that he's doing now. But he was writing for newspapers and magazines and this sort of thing. They'd send him out there on location to write whatever the topic is, whatever needs to be covered there. And while he was out there, he was learning about the cultures and observing noticing a lot of the ancient history and this sort of thing. He started putting pieces together as he was visiting these different locations, and so he started writing about his findings. And so he is not traditionally from science, right? He does not have a scientific degree. He doesn't have the letters after his name. He's not a PhD in geology or archaeology or anything like that. He's a journalist, but he's still a smart guy, and he's able to put the pieces together and say, hey, this lines up with this connects to here, and boom. But because he's not of the Church of Science, right? It's not acceptable. So of course they're not burning him at the stake, but what they're doing is they're burning him in mass media. So yeah, it's the same thing. So let's move on to another example here. Okay, so for a long time, the Hittites, biblical Hittites, were considered to be a completely fictitious nation of people. And for many years, this was one of the several things that scholars and academics would kind of point out and say, well, stories of the Bible are just fiction. They're just myths. They're all, Bible's not true at all because, Hittites, and they would use that as one of the examples. Hittites didn't exist. Well, wouldn't you know? Well, they do. For centuries, yet again, Uh, yeah, the Hittites was considered by many to be fictitious peoples only mentioned in the Bible, and that was one of the things is they were having a hard time finding a record of um, a group of people called the Hittites outside of the Bible. In as they have discovered, oh yeah, they really did exist. They have found that that other cultures, other nations called them something else. They didn't call like Egypt didn't call them the Hittites, and I do not recall offhand what Egypt called them, but I know Egypt called them something else. 'Cause, Ramses the Great, Ramses the Second. We find in one of his stories where he had loads of wives. One of his wives was a Hittite woman, but she wasn't called a Hittite in the ancient Egyptian language. Again, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but they're able to piece that together. Like, oh, but yeah. So in 1834, French archaeologist Felix Marie Charles Texier, or Texier, it's probably pronounced, discovered monumental ruins in Bekaskoy, which I'm probably butchering that too, but basically central northern Turkey. So basically, he said, "Hey, there's some interesting ruins over here," and that was kind of about it. Um, and it was a good 50 years later, 1886, 52 years later, that one of his countrymen, uh, George Perot, was an actual archaeologist, went to go excavate the site because he had heard about there being ruins there, and was able to identify this as being the Hittite capital of Hattusa. And there are many excavations over there for the next couple of decades, and they actually started finding clay cuneiform tablets with Akkadian written on them and all this, and that's kind of what started piecing it together that these were actually the Hittites. Is once they started finding that Akkadian in other pieces of writing, it was like this was them. Okay, they existed. So, yeah, another one that for years and years and years, not real, not real, not real. Boom. Oh, okay. Guess they're real. Oops. So, of course, you know where I'm going to take this, right? Right? If these massive cities and civilizations in the Amazon existed, if Troy really existed, if the Hittites really existed, after years and years and years and years, decades, centuries, millennia of being told, not true, not true, not true, and we finally find them. Well, what does that mean for something like Atlantis? We've been told by scholars for centuries that it's just a tale, it's just a myth, just a story that just some fiction that Plato put together. That maybe there are some messages in there that he wanted his countrymen to learn, the other scholars there. And I point out, because I go through this in Portals to the Stars. If that's really what he was doing, then actually in the middle of all of it, he greatly insulted all of his friends by calling them, basically children, like straight up calling them children, and basically saying that they were stupid and naive and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, we have in the Timaeus and Critias the story of Atlantis here as told by Plato. And a lot of modern academia tries to, like, when their take on it, when they're trying to decipher what's going on in these texts, they're trying to impart what he's saying onto a island nation of that era, of Plato's era, or around Plato's era, like Santorini and some of these other locations around the Mediterranean, saying, well, this could be, he could have used this city, or even underwater cities today, just because the sea levels have risen so much over time. It's like, well, this could have been the inspiration for what Plato wrote. And it's like, Why does it have to be that it's all made up, make believe, whatever, and that he was using a city around his time frame to tell this particular story? Why can't we go by what he actually said, which is, you know, six or not well 600 AD. He wouldn't have said 600 AD, but basically, a couple hundred years ago, um, my great uncle Solon had gone to Egypt, and actually that was well known that yes, Solon had gone to Egypt, and he studied at the temple at Sais. He studied in Heliopolis, and he brought back with him this fantastic story of Atlantis. Now, Solon, the Greeks, Plato, they called it Atlantis. The ancient Egyptians would not have called it Atlantis. They would have called it something else. Story according to that Solon brought back. Solon went there in 600 BC. The story that Solon brought back was that, hey, the Egyptian priest told me 9,000 years ago, this event happened with Atlantis and the destruction and all of that. Now, the story started coming about because Solon, being this learned Greek philosopher, was trying to tell the priest there in Sais about the Great Flood. So he's telling the story of the Great Cataclysm and the flood and all of this, and the priest Sanchis starts laughing at him. And this is why I'm like, yeah, Plato would be insulting his fellow philosophers if he was actually fictionalizing this. But Sanchis starts laughing at Solon. It's like, Solon, it's nothing. You Greeks are but children. You really know nothing. He starts telling him that, you're telling me about one cataclysm, but there have been many cataclysms. And what essentially happens is that when each one would happen, the people that would survive, he's like, you have the mountain men and the shepherds and all these sorts of people that are the ones that are surviving. You have these uneducated ones that are hiding up in the mountains away from the water that survived, and they have to restart everything again. He tells them these cataclysms have happened multiple times, and here in Egypt, we've kept those records. But you guys are but children. It's hilarious. So this is the story of Atlantis that he's talking about there. But we actually find that story in Egypt, not in full. Temple of Sais, long since destroyed. Heliopolis, much of that is gone. They moved when the Greeks came in. They moved the center of learning from Heliopolis up to Alexandria. The Greeks have greatly expanded that city of Alexandria there they renamed it Alexandria, of course, and they built it out, and they built the great library, and all the center of learning was moved there from Heliopolis, all the records from there up to Alexandria. And of course, what happened to the great library? Burned down 200 years later. So we just have scant fragments that were at some other, the Serapeum up there was a daughter library, had some documents, but yeah, they estimate like 40,000 documents. If the Atlantis story was there, it was gone. But the ancient Egyptians were not fools. They knew that when the Greeks were taking over, that their culture was starting to get diluted. And in fact, it was just a few hundred years after that, after they built the Temple of Edfu, that the last hieroglyphs were written and the language was lost for 1,800 years. And so what they did at the Temple of Edfu is they created as many of their texts as they could. I mean, the place is just covered and covered and covered in hieroglyphs. And they're going to here, because they're trying to retain their culture, going to include the most important pieces. And what we have there is the creation story, and we have the Atlantis story, which they don't call it Atlantis, they call it the homeland of the primeval ones. And so I'm going to play a little clip here. Some of you have seen this, but this is describing here the story that's there at Edfu.
Interpretation of the text is the island of the primeval ones. And it's very, very similar to the details that we have in the Atlantis story. Like we were talking about yesterday, the Atlantis story as is written that we have is from Plato. Well, Plato got it from Solon, which was his great uncle a couple of hundred years down the road. And Solon had come down here to Egypt, the Temple of Sais. We saw that photo of that ruined temple. So we no longer have the original text from there. Solon had gone there, talked to a priest named Sanchi, studied under him for a long period of time, and brought the story back to Greece with him. So, of course, the Egyptians, they like to tell their stories and spread their word. So this was a place when they built Edfu where they could record their history. And I believe they knew that there was something that was going to happen to their culture, that it was going to get lost. So they covered this temple with so much of their information, but they couldn't record every single detail, which is why we don't have the full story, but we have it in part up here of those, what they call the primeval ones. Like Ahmed was saying that, yeah, they've kind of deified them as gods. They could have been people that came, and their island was destroyed like Atlantis with water and fire and was completely lost. And then they had to survive and find a new land to rebuild their civilization. So when we see some of these, the pyramids and repurposing of these really old buildings, that was a part of that lost culture that they were rediscovering again and repurposing. Because Atlantis, the story that we see here as well, it wasn't just one island, it wasn't just one place, it was a worldwide culture. That was like the capital that we were seeing here getting destroyed, and it's really just a glimpse of that Atlantis story in part. Wish we could find the bigger story, if we could find something under Sais, but like you said, they've kind of, it sounds like they stopped excavating there if it's become covered over again. Maybe find some lost scrolls or something. But this is it in part up here. The Zep Tepi, the first time, is what they call it.
Yeah. So, yeah, Temple of Sais is pretty, it's just a ruin. It's pretty well obliterated. And Ahmed, who works for Mohammed, was telling us that, yeah, it's pretty much, they had excavated it out. There wasn't a lot there, and they just kind of let it get covered back over again. So kind of a shame. So we're not going to find anything there. Yeah, it's we're really going to have to, I mean, they're doing a lot of excavations out in Egypt. So maybe one of these days something will turn up that will shed more light on that story. So question here from Sarah. Do you think all historical data is recorded in the Akashic record? Can the full truth ever be known? So we've covered this a bit when we've talked the nature of time. So all time is present, past, present, future. Everything is concurrent here right now, and our consciousness is on the fourth dimension. So we're kind of trapped in that, what we call the river of time. But for those, because we have up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions, 0 to 10, those that are above us, 5, 6, 7, 8, it's all there. They can access that. So if everything is all here right now, then yes, that knowledge is accessible. So the Akashic records, I look at it like this. We're using similar terms for really describing the same thing. So you have the Akashic records, you have the Jung's, Carl Jung's collective unconscious, kind of the same thing. I call it eternal knowledge. It's knowledge of the universe that is always there, ever present with us, because the universe is every moment of the universe is present to us. So if I was to tap into the right frequency to observe something that happened here 100 years ago, then I would become privy to that knowledge of whatever was going on here 100 years ago. Maybe I'd learn something about the farmer that was here and how he was doing whatever, or 100 years from now, I could observe somebody else doing whatever in this room, right? Or you could go to some other location and see something from the past that occurred, or go into the future and watch a process done so that you learn how to do it, those sorts of things. So yeah, all that knowledge is right here in the universe right now, and it's really just kind of becoming ready for it. So like if I tapped into, if you want to call it a record, or I tapped into a piece of knowledge or a moment in time, I don't know, I'll say 500 years from now, um, we've developed hyperspace travel, warp speed, whatever you want to call it. So I could go 500, and maybe I'm sitting there watching these guys, create it, right? Would I, with my 2024 mind, be able to understand what it is that they're doing? I might be watching and observing the different things that they're doing to build it, whatever technology that they might have at the time to be able to program it and piece it all together. But I might not really understand that at all. And so I could come back and be like, oh yeah, guys, it was really cool, but I couldn't tell you how to do it. Because my mind just doesn't have what it would take to do that. Even a modern scientist would probably be challenged by that. But you do see people throughout history that have gained a little extra. So like Nikola Tesla, he was basically 100 years ahead of his time. He was building drones and developing wireless technology, talking about basically what our modern cell phone is. And so he was doing it in a bit of a different way back then. And the way that he described it back then was a little bit different than we have now, but he was really, really in tune with our modern concepts today. And he was laughed at back then for talking about these different ideas and concepts. They were very, very kind of short-sighted. So like Marconi, even though he was using Tesla technology, he had taken Tesla's material and was doing shore-to-ship transmissions. And so light bulbs went on for different investors and everything, like, oh, I can understand that. I can see that happening. That would be very helpful if we could communicate from the shore to ship and ship to shore and all that. Yeah, absolutely. And Tesla's like, that's nothing, guys. Forget all that. We're going global with this. And the other scientists and investors and that at the time were like, whoa, what are you talking about here? That's ridiculous. The whole globe. But yeah, and we have that today. So yeah, Tesla, and this was a guy that kind of like Einstein, he would do his thought experiments and things like that. So it's really kind of almost like a bit of a meditative state, kind of sit there and go into the thought experiment. So he's basically meditating, putting himself on that frequency. And Tesla talked about, he didn't really call it astral projecting, but when he was a young man in Serbia, he was essentially astral projecting. So he was kind of already really tuned into that metaphysical plane. So yeah, he was able to go out and grab some of this eternal knowledge that was 100 years ahead of his time and bring it back with him. Really fascinating what he was able to do, or basically conceive during that era. And he did make a lot of accomplishments during that era too, of course. So I guess a couple of things. We're not going to be able to get to all of it here, and I have some of this saved for the after show anyway. But so this leads us to some different possibilities of what other legends and lore may actually be true and accurate, since we are talking like different dimensions and time travel and stuff like that right now. Okay, the idea of the idea of fairies. These are kind of like, really classic legend and lore out of like Ireland and Wales and all this. This is the fairy dance painting by William Holmes Sullivan, 1882. But you have some really, really interesting stories about like the story of Rhys and Llewellyn, where, a couple of guys working the farm for their landowner, and as they're walking back, Rhys is saying, I'm hearing this music. I'm hearing this music. I want to go check it out. And Llewellyn's like, we kind of need to go. And Rhys is like, no, I'll catch up to you. Don't worry about it. Okay, so Llewellyn continues on. Rhys never shows up. He never returns. And because these two guys were buddies, are working together, all that, Llewellyn starts getting accused of, you must have done something to Rhys. He actually started getting accused of murder. Like, we think you may have murdered him. And so Llewellyn starts telling the story. He starts telling the story. No, he was saying something about hearing music or whatever. Finally, one of the other guys there said, oh, you know what? It sounds a bit like one of our, fairy legends. So they go back to the spot where they had parted ways, and they're looking around, not finding anything. And then all of a sudden, as he's Rhys and some of the other guys are looking around, or Llewellyn and some of the other guys are looking around, Llewellyn starts hearing the music. Where's it? And then all of a sudden, because he had stepped kind of right in the right spot, he suddenly sees Rhys. And Rhys is kind of almost like this, dancing around with these little people. And Llewellyn's like, what are you doing? Come here. We've been waiting for you since yesterday. And Rhys is like, what are you talking about? I've only been here like 5 minutes. And so yeah, they were able to yank him out of this thing, which is, these type of stories, it's almost a bit of an abduction scenario. He wasn't really abducted. I mean, he was kind of tricked into following the music. But he ended up in another dimension or realm somewhere, and he experienced that different, kind of had that time loss type incident. It's very, very similar to what we find in our modern UFO accounts. And so, so there's a relationship here to these type of legends that we may be starting to find out in our modern day in context of, okay, these UFO encounters, these time loss incidents. You have the Harvard, the Harvard research paper come out here. You had that come out here, what, 3 or 4 months ago, something like that, saying, oh, there may be extraterrestrials living alongside us in another dimension. Like, guys, it's not an extraterrestrial. Then it's actually, I was saying, earthling. We call them ultra terrestrials. You could say they're an interdimensional being, right? But they're finally starting to catch on to this stuff that we've kind of been talking about for a long time. Yeah. So yeah, Rhys may have actually been pulled into another dimension alongside of us by these other beings that are living alongside of us. So we may start to see some of this really start to, they would call it like a discovery, but it's stuff we've been talking about for a while. It's already been discovered. It's kind of just realizing what's already there. Yeah. So, yeah, Rodrigo, same thing happened to Travis Walton. But in his was kind of more of the classic UFO abduction. He was, taken aboard the ship, and what he thought had, when he returned, he thought it was the same night, but it had been 5 days. And so, yeah, when people are reporting going on to this mothership or whatever, I don't necessarily think it's, a mothership up in space hovering above the planet or something like that. I think it may actually, and it could be a ship, but I think it may actually be residing in another dimension somewhere. So, they pull the person onto there, and not only do they, basically kidnap him and put him onto the ship. But then they go into another dimension where time works differently, and that's why people will come back reporting, I thought it was 5 minutes, I thought it was an hour, and it's like been days or whatever. Yeah. So I do want to cover one other thing on the public side real quick. So I haven't talked about this one for a while, which is why I want to do it now. And we just had Halloween and everything, and I covered this story in my book Ghosts of Maryland. And so one of the things that I was really proud of with my couple of early paranormal books, like Ghosts of Maryland, Ghosts and Legends of Oklahoma, was for me. In addition to providing people with this information, they're getting the stories of true hauntings and all that. It was also giving a voice to these people from days gone by that had been forgotten to time. And so, as I was doing the research for that book, first you always kind of, some places. Oh, we want to hit, want to hit the Samuel Mudd House, and I want to go to some of the battlefields. But it's like, oh, where else could I go? So yeah, sure. You throw it into Google, haunted places and in Maryland. So okay, Montpelier Mansion. And so you're reading through, okay, so what are some interesting stories about this place? And so you're reading some of the little stories. I might be able to do something with that. I might be able to go there and find out some more things. And I came across this little one-liner, and it showed up on a couple of different sites that just said there was the ghost of a young woman there that was forlorn over losing the love of her life. Okay, really, really obscure, right? So, so I go to the house. I tour it. I'm walking the grounds, finding out more information about it, and a really, really interesting history too, because the daughter had married the stepson of George Washington. They had a huge, like 2-week wedding celebration there. The boxwoods that are still there today are said to have been a gift from George Washington, and all this stuff is really, really fascinating. There's some wonderful ghost stories associated with this place. So, but I was still like, hey, I want to find out more about this girl, but I couldn't for a while. But as I'm doing research on the house, and I like to go to a lot of old sources. Give me the original text. Give me the old stuff. Because so much just, again, gets lost over time, or to condense things, compact things, people just tear out pieces of information. So I found this book from 1914, Colonial Mansions of Maryland and Delaware, because it did cover this particular house. And I found the story. So, and it starts off here. The tragedy of Ariana Calvert's life is one of the most pathetic stories connected with the historic old mansion. She loved a young man who had been received at her father's house, but was not looked upon with favor, excuse me, as the daughter's prospective husband. Starting to lose my voice. I've been talking a lot the last few days. So it's like, oh, wow, this is it. I found the story. And, the whole story of her life is right there in this book. And it was really tragic. So yeah, she had fallen in love with this local young man. And for whatever reason, her father, Benedict, just did not like this boy whatsoever. And so he forbade Ariana from seeing him. Well, of course, young people falling in love are going to try to find a way to see each other. And so since he realized it wasn't working out, he sent Ariana to live with her sisters in Annapolis. And so the distance from Upper Marlboro to Annapolis might not be that far of a drive today, but back in the day, it's going to take you a while. It's going to take you, maybe a day or two or whatever by buggy to get between the two. It's going to be a little bit of a distance. So, she's distraught. She's upset. Her sisters were trying to find her. Okay, father's not going to let you see this young man. You're stuck here with us until you get over it. Just get over it, girl. till you get over it. And so we're going to find you. We're going to find you some other guys. And so they're bringing in all these other suitors, and Ariana just turned them away, turned them away, turned them away. And she was growing more and more and more depressed throughout this time, to the point that she started getting sick. She started getting ill, and like deathly ill at that. It was terrible. So finally, during this time, Benedict, the father, passes away. Her mother, Elizabeth, takes pity upon the girl and says, "Well, yeah, you can come back. You can come back home." But it was like too late by then. Like Ariana was so deathly sick and ill that she got home and died. Just again, really, really a tragic tale. But you're finding this story from the legend of this ghost story, and I mean, her spirit, yes, may still be there, may still be restless. She may still be, haunting the location. I can say, while I was there, I did not encounter young Ariana. But it's a legend of her ghost that is permeated throughout the structure, that there is this real history to this real story. It has a lot more depth, and it gives her meaning, although quite sad, it gives her meaning, more life. And so, we're able to, again, give her a voice today, which I think was very important. So, all right, we're going to get wrapping this up. I do want to preview really quick for those that are members of the Connected Universe portal, where we're going to another interesting legend. It's much more local to here, that we'll be covering in the after show. That is the Gore Orphanage. Yeah, so we're gonna cover what that really was. We'll cover the fire. It's not what you think. It's absolutely not what you think. So Tom probably remembers this story. It's been a while. It's actually been some years since I've covered this, but I used to I used to like do almost like mini tours up there. Like if I'd have a friend in town, or even maybe a friend of mine locally that I knew, like, let me take you up there, and we'll tour, and I'll give you the whole spiel of what really happened there. So we're going to cover a little bit of that here in the after show. There's a lot of sadness associated with it, but again, it's not. Let's say this: there never really was a Gore orphanage. At least not that building. There was an orphanage up the hill, but it was not called the Gore Orphanage. We'll get into all of that. We'll get into all, and Tom says he does remember. So, and yeah, Karen, it was a very sad story, and Michelle as well. All right. So for those listening to the podcast version of this later, again, you can join us every Wednesday night, 8:00 p.m. Eastern time, connecteduniverseportal.com. And yeah, grab Portals to the Stars, the latest book for me. Some of this stuff was certainly covered in there, especially the Atlantis stuff, considering it's inside Stargates, Atlantis, and Secrets of Ancient Egypt. I definitely cover that within Portals to the Stars. So, all right, those that are members of the Connected Universe portal, you time travelers, you hang tight. Everybody else, enjoy the rest of your evening. Till next time, time really exists.